Okay, everybody, let's get started. We've talked all week about how we're very keen to have you guys contribute to the toolkit. So the next session is about a description about how exactly we see that happening and how the whole package can be structured. So I'll, at this point, hand over to our software engineers, Austin and David.
Thank you, Rachel. So yeah, we're going to talk to you a little bit about our support model, about how to get help, and about how to give back to the Tom Toolkit, if you so choose. So the first thing we want to do is just reiterate the availability of some of our documentation. I know some people explored it. I got questions about it. We do have API documentation that we are still adding to, but has some very useful information right now. All of the tutorials that we've gone through and some extras that really inform you about the functionality of the Tom Toolkit and how to do common things, that's all on our Read the Docs site. And then the Django documentation is a really valuable resource. I know it can be a little bit scary sometimes to find what you're looking for, but oftentimes if you're asking how to do something, we're probably going to refer you there anyway to show you how. So if you're wondering how something can be done, oftentimes the Django docs are where you would go.
So the support model is also something we're currently considering how to do. Also like to open the floor to any. Obviously, GitHub issues, good place to start if you have problems. We saw a lot of issues during this week, but that's a good thing. That means that the more that we record, the better the toolkit will be. So please, if you find a problem, great place to start is GitHub issues. We'd also like to consider setting up a Slack workspace. Everyone in this community pretty much already on at least 5 Slack workspaces, so what's another? And then, of course, you can always reach out via email, but stuff tends to get lost in there, so that's kind of like a last resort. Again, issues, here's like the issue hierarchy of how we like to deal with them. So at the bottom, you find an issue and you get pissed off and then you just move on. That's just going to happen to the next person, so that's not great. And then, of course, what makes you a super person is by finding them, fixing them, and then pull requests. Which actually we've already seen happen. Thank you, Constant, for your pull request. You found a bug during the week, and it's fixed.
So bug reporting is obviously really valuable. Sometimes it's really hard to figure out what exactly is going on just if you say, I got an exception when I tried to do this. So really important that you inform us of what steps you took. An exception is really nice, but oftentimes the actual cause is a little bit further up, so that full stack trace is nice. The operating system and the Python versions and your installed packages in that environment are really valuable in case things are not interacting well. We'd also like to know what exactly you're expecting it to do. I know it's a feature, not a bug, is sort of a joke in the software community, but that can really happen. We just created a template for this in GitHub, so when you do create an issue, there is a template. Please follow it.
Again, we get a lot of feature requests. They're pretty hard to keep track of, so there's just some basic guidelines. Not super complicated. What are you trying to do and why are you trying to do it? But often it's not clear, so please, when you make feature requests.
Yeah, and just to clarify, when we ask why you're trying to do something, it might be something that could be solved a little bit easier, so we want to be able to help in that way. So when submitting a pull request, it's not the most clear thing at the moment in GitHub, but your pull request will run through our tests, and it will run through a style check. Those have to pass. We need to make sure that it actually plays well with the rest of the framework, and we are so grateful if you include tests. So grateful. No one likes writing them, least of all us. So if you do it for us, it's great. So one area that can be a little bit confusing is that we're trying to sort of create a larger set of repositories. We don't necessarily want to put everything in the core toolkit. Part of that is to reduce dependencies, and with that, we want to prevent installation issues. One great example is that our air mass plotting previously used PyFM, which is pretty old and has some issues installing due to other dependencies. Jamie did some great work to extract the moving target visibility into a separate repository, and so if you want to take on the risk of installing PyFM, you can do so, but otherwise, it now uses Astroplan. So that was a great way to sort of reduce that risk of people having issues with installation. And so the other thing that people are going to run across is that we have a couple different places that code can go. There's obviously the Tom base, and this is a great example that Brian has encountered. In the Tom base, he has a Gemini module, and then because there can be some issues with a dependency there, he also has the Tom Gemini community plugin, which you can install at your own risk. And then ultimately, it uses his GS Select, which if you ever want to use in the Tom Toolkit, he hosts that in his own repository. And so there's a couple different places that things can go. Sometimes we would want to create a brand new repository. Sometimes it would go into a common Tom contrib. And sometimes just let us know that it exists. We have an affiliated packages page in our docs. And that's also a great way to get the word out for your own code and get people using it.
Yeah, so here's just some examples to show that we're not totally making this up. Django has a system for this. If you ever import something from go.contrib, that means that that code is not part of the core project. So they're doing it. And AstroPy, a lot of people are familiar with, they have a whole affiliated packages thing going on. So we're trying to use that as inspiration for what we're doing. So yeah, what are we actually looking for in contributions? Well, we're looking for any kind of contribution, but in particular, the science-specific stuff. We're software engineers. We kind of work best deep in the weeds of the framework, but when it comes to like super scientific specific stuff, we're not so great at it. So examples, data visualization, cross-matching, pipelines, things like that would make for awesome contributions to the Tom Toolkit. I've already seen some examples this week. Griffin wrote a Tom alert module for the transient name server, which is now in an open pull request. That's awesome. Constant has an ongoing project to include cross-matching, so it's really cool to see this become the community project that it was always meant to be. Oh, and documentation also. If you want to write a tutorial or something, that's definitely a welcome contribution. And of course, bug fixes.
So ultimately, one thing that we're aiming to do today is sort of open this up, and we want to know how you want to interact with the toolkit. We would like to know what is going to be useful for all of you, and so at this point, we'd like to solicit, how you would like to interact with us and what will help you do the science that you want to do and build a useful Tom. So, any suggestions? Very welcome right now.
Yep.
So I know people throughout the week have come to me with ideas. So at this point, we really would like you to give your opinions of how you see this working as a contributed model. If you see any pitfalls or issues, or you want to raise any questions, now's the chance. Starting with Yair.
Yeah, okay, so I wanted to reiterate something I asked earlier in the week about the whole user experience, user design aspect that we need some expert help with. But I also wanted to ask about the long-term plans for very long-term plans for the Tom Toolkit, and this is probably a question for you, Rachel, or for Lisa. How far down the road is LCO committed funding-wise, and just, what funding-wise or just policy-wise to support this as something we should really all invest in and buy into in 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road? Or are we going to be in a situation like with IRAF where we're really dependent on it, but we can't? I mean, I don't know. Just I know it's hard to plan that far down, but has there thought been put into this? And like currently, until when is this support funded?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So under the current funding model that we have, thanks to the foundations that have been supporting this work, we have software support for another 2 years. So that was intended to really get the base toolkit going and get the community outreach program going so that we understood whether the community was really going to adopt this wholesale. At that point, yes, we will be looking for further funding from that point onwards. As you know, of course, LCO's software team is supported in-house. That's separate from that, so it's not dependent on the foundation funding. And we plan to continue to support over the longer term. Yes, we will be looking for funding from other sources at the end of that period, but we are seeing this as a long-term user support project for us.
Quick follow-up. Are there, other than private foundations, are there channels in our community to support something like this? I don't know how AstroPi works. Is that funded by anyone, or is it just a community best effort basis, and is that something realistic for the Tom Toolkit?
Curtis, do you want to speak to that?
As far as I know, AstroPi doesn't have a direct funding stream. Yeah. So, yeah, as Matthew just correctly said, specific packages are supported directly by the AAS. So there is some funding in AstroPi, but the AstroPi umbrella organization doesn't have funding.
I believe this is something that was highlighted in some of the white papers that went to the decadal survey. So over the longer timescale, it's something that I hope astronomy is going to wake up to, that we are increasingly depending on packages like AstroPi and hopefully the Tom Toolkit, and these really need to be supported at some central level.
Yeah, just going back to the slides that you put up. There's a sort of it's incumbent on us. I mean, I'm very impressed with the Tom Toolkit, by the way. Just put that out there, right? And you're saying it's incumbent upon us to provide you with a detailed bug report or feature analysis or whatever it is. But there's an incumbency upon you as well, right? I mean, if I actually send you a bug report and I don't hear from you from 6 months, well, I'm not going to use this again, right? So I want to know what sort of turnaround time you're anticipating, because I see it as a very interactive process.
Yeah, I would say at the moment it's at a best effort basis. I'm not really sure how you would enforce something like that, but yeah, we're definitely doing our best to engage with the community in the best of our abilities, and also that's why we're here. So
Yeah, this is our full-time position. So obviously this is what we're invested in, and we're going to react as quickly as we can, within the context of our jobs. So
I will add that LCO see this as one of our big projects for the community, but also for our own use. So you will not be the only scientist pushing for the Tom Toolkit to become more fully featured. Our own in-house scientists are using this too. So it is something we will actively support.
Maybe you could speak a little bit to how general should something be for you to want it in the Tom base? Like if I write a plugin for my own little telescope that no one else is ever going to use, I assume no, but what are you looking for exactly?
So, I mean, at the moment, we're kind of doing things on a case-by-case basis. Ultimately, one thing that we do care about is that everything that goes into Tom base is something that we know that we can fix, that we can properly test, So something like that would probably belong in a separate repository, simply because we can't, vouch for its quality. If we don't have time on that telescope, we really can't test that it works properly, or, if we don't have authentication. So really it is going to be largely case by case. But the main thing is that we want to make sure that what we are providing works and works right. And so that's how we're going to be making that determination.
Yeah, and I would add that it also really depends on the impact of the rest that what you contribute has on the rest of the users of the toolkit. So, for example, the Antares plugin, we would love to have it in the base module, but it has large dependencies on Kafka and things like that, which is if you're not planning on using the Antares client, it doesn't help your situation. So we do have to evaluate things on a case-by-case basis to make sure that including people's code isn't going to negatively affect the rest of the user base.
Are there any plans or ways to interact the TOM with some other alert system that are not brokers, like emails from amateurs and stuff like that?
Yeah, we're definitely open to any ideas of how we could accomplish that. Yeah.
I'll add to that. This is one area where we're really looking for your feedback. So far, the Tom Toolkit has had feedback from mostly our in-house science team, and we have our own science interests. That's great. But different areas of science have very different ways of working and very different workflows and channels of communication. So our in-house science team isn't going to be able to represent all of you. And that's why it's really valuable to get all of your feedback on what tools are useful for you and how this helps your workflow. And that's partly why we wanted to hold this session and really get you thinking about the sort of things that you could either build as part of a proposal or contribute, or just make a suggestion to us that, hey, this would be really useful. Is anyone thinking of any plugins or tools they want to write as a part of their proposal? Anybody else? Oh, yeah. Hi.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about a few things like cross-referencing with external catalogs, with archival data from Space Telescope or things like that. But having the ability to input theoretical models to show me on top of data and maybe even use that to anticipate what the next data point is going to be and set the exposure time accordingly or something like that. But I have no idea how much work or how realistic these things are. So my next question was, do you think it would be useful, or is it something that's even possible to have like a hack week or something in Santa Barbara with just the whole software team at our disposal to build? Yes, no, here was the first step. Yes, here was the first step, but now I know, what the Tom Toolkit is, I did not know on Monday morning. And what I can start thinking about doing it, and in a few months I'm going to want to start working on it. But I also want to do that in a secluded place where people cannot bother me with other daily stuff. But also I know I'm going to have a question every 30 seconds. And so I don't know if it's feasible to organize like a hack week where people come to build their real Tom that they're going to use for their system together in a room with support available continuously, and then just have like a very intense coding week for that.
Software team, you want to respond to that?
Sounds fun. I'm not sure that people are going to have the availability to just come to Santa Barbara, but yeah. We could also explore doing something like that using like an online space. But yeah, it's a great idea.
Problem is there any citizen science, Tom?
Where
So,
you're thinking about something like this, right?
So we're thinking of proposing something like that along with Zooniverse, sort of a set of tools to allow a close integration so that if you have, say, a stream of 1,000 candidate targets, a way of sorting through that rapidly.
Seeds of collaboration have been planted.
You should also reach out to Edward Gomez from Las Cumbres UK, who's already working towards having citizen science programs. He's got some very good ideas as well. Oh,
Speaking as an astronomer and not a software engineer, I would like to see a tutorial that is more astronomer friendly, like very basic things like how do you create a website from scratch, like HTML, things like that. Because I learned a lot, but it will be nice to have like a very, very basic introduction so I can learn even more. I don't know if that's beyond your goals.
I think to that, I would say there are really good tutorials for things like just learning HTML or some other language online with like Code Academy, for example. But maybe it would be good to put links to those somewhere on the Tom documentation. Yeah.
Here's a question I'd like to throw out to the owners of observatories in the room. One aspect of the workflow that my particular Tom uses is, as Yair touched on earlier, the idea of querying in real time an exposure time calculator for my instrument that I plan to use, and my targets change brightness very rapidly. So I need to be able to do this in real time on a daily basis, and I'd really like to have an API to do that, to which we could build a plugin. What sort of scope do we have for that? Stunning silence. Go ahead.
Few initial thoughts. I might have to go play with ours to see exactly what it can do. Again, that's something we want to have in our new system. That doesn't help us now. One thing I thought of is our ITC as a web interface. We know we've done, I'm trying to remember the name of the package. There's a Python package that allows you to fill in fields in web forms, and we've used it to run the ITC. If I can remember how all that works, we might be able to share the information. But I think it is possible to run like the Gemini ITCs like that.
Well, I mean, we don't even have a full exposure time calculator at SOAR, which is kind of embarrassing. But I mean, there is one for soy, but not for the other instruments. And one thing that's something where, we're trying to fix it right now. Given that we finished a lot of the big effort was put mostly on the spectroscopic data reduction pipeline. But now we're moving to doing these other kind of smaller things, but you never get to do because there are always big things in the way. And this is a good suggestion because then we can think of doing it with the proper hooks already in place, so you can do that kind of query via an API.
Yeah, from my own experience, it really does enable a real-time program of the kind of really dynamic science that time domain astronomy is really going to move to. But speaking of SOAR, I know that one of our solar system team at LCO have been busy building a exposure time calculator from first principles for spectroscopic observations. So they're hoping to apply that to some Goodman observations as well. So there's a lot of work going on in this area. What other kind of tools would be useful for enabling programs of that kind of workflow?
Sorry, going back to the earlier question, really. I think ESA and NASA and people in Europe and the IBOA are interested in making public satellite schedules and visibilities. So that takes away some of that broadens the perspective of what you might actually want to by the time forward. So,
Yeah, another kind of request to observatory level things. If you can expose your weather status in some kind of an API way, would be really helpful for basically everybody.
Has anyone thought about the data visualization tools, apart from Yaya's suggestion of overlaying or submitting theoretical models? Apparently not.
So, yeah, this hasn't come up a lot so far, but the Tom Toolkit by default uses Plotly as the plotting backend. There's some very good reasons for that, and I really do like that project a lot. But it would be interesting to see what other people's thoughts on that are, and I think as people play with it more, I really liked the talk this morning about the LSST data lab thing that I've forgotten the name of, but I think that's a great visualization tool, and I'd love to see some of that integrated into the Tom Toolkit. Just the whole prison, the science platform, yes. Yeah.
So the thought has occurred to us to build some means of getting the science platform to communicate to and from the Tom, and it does have this API already. So as users start to get access to the science platform increasingly, then hopefully that will become a higher priority to implement. But I am very aware that, as Gregory said in his talk, there's only 10% of LSST's computing resources are available for the world community, which doesn't really sound like a whole lot. So for those hang on, Matthew, I'll come to you. For those people from outside the US and Chile, if your communities are considering proposing for, say, data archive centers for LSST data as a way of proposing an in-kind contribution, then that maybe mirroring the science platform is something to consider.
So let me just address the point you raised. There's a wonderful thing called Google Colab, which allows you to run Jupyter notebooks that will take up to 12 to 18 hours of compute time, free on Google. We've learned yesterday or the day before how to connect Toms through to Jupyter notebooks. So, there are resources out there in the world to do things on short term, at large scale, and they've got GPU and TPU backends that you can use for free. So if you want to get into that regime as well, there's stuff out there. So, maybe an example, or a couple of example things of these are notebooks which are running on Google Colab but talking to a Tom somewhere, and just showing that interface would be.
I just want to reiterate that about Google Collaboratory. I've done pipelines on that with tens of thousands of images, and it works just fine. Of course, if everybody does that, Google might start thinking twice. But hey.
So just tacking on to this conversation, the people at Google are actually there's a set of people there that are actually really excited for LSST, and there's been some talk about actually developing some sort of tools on their GCP to actually target the scientific community user base of exploring LSST data and some of the different integrated tools that go into there. And so some of the things that we're talking about here kind of tie into that. So, talking about and being interested in something and then writing the code for something are two different things. But I mean, I see a lot of potential to kind of connect those two designs.
So one more thing that I have not thought through is some machine learning modules that can be somewhere incorporated. So at the Tom level, I don't know if there is a vision to use Toms also to search for candidates in like survey streams, because the Tom right now gets alerts with real bogus scores, but maybe a Tom can be used to make that at the survey level, but also at higher levels of like, the supernova exchange now has, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of supernovae in it with data. And I was always thinking it would be nice if we could have something that says, hey, this one is similar to that one, and this has similar properties as that. Connections we don't make because we can't, because it's too much, but that maybe some kind of algorithm could say, this supernova might be similar to that one, and maybe there's a class here that you missed, or something at that level of once you have all these targets and data in one place, you can start doing. But just, I don't know, machine learning stuff in general.
Do any of the broker operators want to answer that? Because I know there's a lot of effort going in at that level.
So we are working on something similar to that. That's like on-level data clustering, but I think we got a long way to get like user models up in production. So but I think it's the broker side that will make that machine learning stuff, and the Toms will consume that.
So I think that question also open another question. What's the limit between a broker and a Tom? I think it's not well defined.
Yeah, you're right. In some degree, it's going to be what the community decide to make it. I mean, there's a broad classification that classification categorization belongs at the broker level, and follow-up is then shunted to the Toms, but then you have the very large-scale combined systems which maybe have elements of both. There's no reason that it has to be hard and fast.
And I would say this isn't a hard and fast rule anyway, but the way I kind of think about the machine learning question that Yair posed would be if you're going to run something on every image you pull in, for example, then that's really a good place to put a hook for a Tom. And so those might be, okay, I've trained this network or whatever, and here are the results from the trained network that I'm going to run some analysis in like an asynchronous task. If you're doing kind of the more classification exploratory things, I think kind of no matter which way you slice it, that's going to be interfacing with the database and pulling the data out in some kind of which, again, that's something that the ORM is really nice to do. Because you can do calculations and you can do things like that to get the data in the format that you need to do for a machine learning kind of thing. I think doing kind of significant analysis in real time on the Tom is going to be hard, though. So that's how I'd kind of slice it apart, but that's just me.
So those of you who are at the LSST brokers meeting back in May, will remember that the Babamol, the Caltech broker that we're proposing for LSST, has as one of its core things an app store approach whereby there will be, we hope people will register machine learning, can then download and run on as you do, based on this, edge TPU stuff that I was talking about, and that Dima's doing a lot of work on. You can imagine that.
Yeah, I was going to say, we kept our chairs fit.
Next time we have to organize where we sit a little bit better before we come in. So just touching on the machine learning comment, there's been, at least from the photometric redshift estimation side of things, there have been a kind of a core group of people that really are interested in working on that have gotten together and written papers and projects kind of comparing the different things that we could do and have done, which has been really, really useful for looking forward to LSST. And there's been this idea floating around that I'd like to just replant here, that it'd be great to do something similar for the different classification and clustering and anomaly detection things that people are also interested in doing, because we have a lot of people kind of building these tools, and it'd be really nice to understand the similarities and the differences between them. So what are some of the pros and the cons, the things that we can learn from looking at them? These are projects that many people have said that they would like to do, but we haven't, gotten any momentum on it. So I'd just like to replant that idea.
So LSST does have an informatics work. Oh, that is good. Should be coordinating that sort of thing. Yeah.
I know of, there's been, sorry.
Sure.
I've taught. We can just throw the microphone. Most of the people I've talked to have been interested in. We've had like small conversations within different collaborations, but I think having a more cohesive conversation would be really good, and that working group would be a perfect place to have it.
That was the original idea behind it, and it's sort of lack of communication between the working groups within LSST, I think, has been one of the problems. But, it's Tom Laredo and Chad Schaefer who are the current chairs of that group. So I think they're the people to prod to say, we think there's a big need for it, and then they can...
I'll poke. Thanks.
Okay.
So to follow up on the sort of discussion about what the difference between the TOM and a broker is, I'm also a little bit confused over what the difference between a TOM and sort of your final analysis is. Because here you have a place where you're going to have all of your targets and all of the data that you have gained from those. It sort of seems natural that you might want to do your analysis in the same environment. But that would mean you'd want to have a lot more connections to, say, for example, notebooks or a lot of tools. And so I'm still confused exactly how deep one wants to go in that. I don't know whether anybody has some thoughts about how much you're willing to put into a TOM or into the framework.
The cop-out answer is, of course, it's personal preference, right? So it depends on how much you want to do it. The nice thing for both even machine learning analysis or analysis for a paper is that all your data is in one place in a common format, and so that's really helpful. Then the question becomes on how much time do you want to put into doing like Jupyter notebooks and things like that. And I think a lot of it's just personal preference. The nice part, though, is the data is all in one place. But at the same time, there are pieces of analysis that you want to. It's kind of the same thing I told about Yair. TOMs are very good places for doing doing the same thing to every image you get. And it kind of depends. Most of those systems I worked with have not been very easy to just write custom code and put it in. But I don't know. What do you think? What do you guys think about custom code? Just kind of running on the back end. You can always run Django managed shell, I guess, and do your analysis there.
Well, I completely agree that it's a case-by-case basis. So whatever makes the most sense for you is what you're going to end up doing, because it's the easiest. But we can provide what we can to make it easy to do analysis within the TOM if that's what we wanted. That's what is required. And you've seen some of that already with like the code hooks. So we're kind of going down that path. But again, it's whatever's easiest for you.
So maybe I'll turn that around and say, if you find that you want to do a piece of analysis that's difficult, like you could feed that back to us, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to pick up on an alternative user model is the microlensing campaign have used effectively management commands to run programs and code and analysis in the background for a long time. And that works for our particular use case, but you guys have your own workflows.
This just got me thinking, let's say I want to do my analysis outside of the TOM. Are there like data export tools at all where I can download all the photometry points that my TOM has in it?
So it's going to be stored in a database. By default, it's a SQLite database, but it could be Postgres or MySQL. So if you want to do offline processing against that database, there's no reason why you can't do that using whatever tool you want to.
Yeah, I could just go in the database directly and run
Yeah.
a query, but I was thinking maybe, for distributed users like the Supernova Exchange, for example, they might prefer to have like download this as a ASCII file button, and then they can, because people are more used to that, I think, than doing things directly on the database.
Sure. There's a couple ways to go about that. One way is with a management command actually called dump data, and you give it the model that you want to dump all the data for, and it spits out either a JSON or a CSV file or something like that. So that's already built in. You can do that.
At present, not the photometry. If that's something that people want, then we can absolutely put that in. That's not that difficult.
This is one area that I wanted to get to, and it seems a good time to raise it, is that we envision TOMS being a mechanism of sharing data, either between groups or perhaps backup streams to the brokers, but it really is a science-specific thing, because different areas of science really have different models for doing this. Some areas have one central clearinghouse, like the MPC, where all the observations essentially are sent upstream immediately, whereas other areas of astronomy tend to work very separately in very siloed teams and tend not to share data. So is there any feedback in the room for what kind of data sharing model you see? Do you see different projects talking to one another, or do you just publish your results and then share data?
Yeah, I'm interested in trying to sort of make the TOM able to be more of a marshal, so that you have people collaborating together and communicating about particular targets. People that, possibly with different expertise, areas of expertise, time on different telescopes, so that you can combine your efforts using a TOM or a marshal in this case. And it's a sort of different approach to the approach that's being taken by EON and by a big collaboration called Engrave in Europe, which has lots of time on the BLT, but everyone else just has to do their own thing outside the collaboration. So.
Yeah, and regarding like data releases through the TOM, I think it would be nice if it would allow, now that I've published this supernova or this sample of supernovae or these events that I have all the data for in the TOM, click a button, make all this data public and accessible. I don't know, send it to all the data repositories that are relevant for, like, we have WISE-Rep for spectra and the Open Supernova Catalog for other stuff. If it could just either, be a platform for releasing the data publicly and or sending it to the existing repositories.
Thank you. So that touched on a number of specific examples of archives that we would like to have plugins to send to. But if there are other examples in your science areas, obviously we're only familiar with those that affect our own science. So suggestions from you, or even better yet, write a plugin, and that would be fantastic. Anyone else?
Small addition. It's a common thing to publish some tables to Vizir, with your publication. Maybe it would be a very useful plugin. Publish your data, for example, table from your paper to Vizir. Stuff.
So one thing I would add that's just crossed my mind is a number of people throughout the week have come to me saying, oh, I've got this idea that I'd like to write a plugin for something. I would like to encourage you to document it and to write a paper on it. Increasingly, the astronomical journals are supporting papers that describe software, especially if it's a published software that's useful to the rest of the community. And it is a referee publication for you, and it documents the software itself. So I strongly want to endorse that and make sure that you are aware that you can publish that and should publish that, and get it registered by the, what is it called, the ADSL, the Astrophysical Source Code Library? Thank you.
Is there a paper on the Tom Toolkit? And if not, how should I acknowledge it in a paper?
Thank you. Yes, there is a paper on the Tom Toolkit. It's an SPIE paper. So what about discoverability? So suppose people out there have written a nice Tom for their own science and they've published it to GitHub, it's open source, has some really nice features maybe somebody else would find useful. How did the rest of the community find out?
So on the documentation, of course, we do have, in addition to our list of affiliated packages, we currently have a list of Toms and links to their source code. So if you simply alert us to that, then we will make it available.
Nice. So this also goes back to having a very well-written README in your GitHub repo. Highly recommended.
Yes, please tell us what your Tom does, because I don't really know anything about astronomy.
Anyone else got any other points they want to raise?
This is a little strange because it's like a pitch for a pitch. But over the course of the week, I talked to several people, Camilo, some others, about the alert module that we worked on yesterday, actually. And it definitely has some limitations. And there's a lot of people that have a lot of different ideas about what it should do. But I've outlined some things here. Providing a richer interface for the brokers. Right now, the data transfer mechanism is a little bit limited. The UI and the user experience isn't that great. We want to have some dummy brokers. This is more like, ask me later. Some of I think the features that everyone would like to see. So I don't know, this is just an example. Of course, there's many things that you could pitch, but here's just one idea, and that's really it.
There's one topic that has just crossed my mind that I wanted to raise before we wrap up, and that's to really think hard about the data sharing permissions and how you would implement those within your Tom. Now, depending on which community of astronomy you come from, people have either very small teams that work completely openly and share data and have no real need for permissions control at all beyond a login. And then there are other communities where half of the world's astronomers seem to be using the same Tom, and none of them are talking to one another. So the Tom has to have extremely precise permissions on specific data points or data products. Now, we hope that we have built the toolkits with sufficient flexibility that you can support the user model that is appropriate for your community. But this is something that I'd like you to consider as you are writing proposals, and give us feedback as to whether it is appropriate for you, because without your feedback, we don't know every area of astronomy and we don't know what your workflow looks like. And so with that thought, are there any more questions before we wrap up? If not, everyone's in a hurry to go for lunch, so I'll let you go. And don't forget, we have the last of our hands-on sessions starting at 2 o'clock in the breakout rooms. Thank you. Oh, yes, right, because we wanted to finish a little bit earlier in case people had flights to catch. Thank you. 1:30.